Joe's Inner Child Podcast.
Every Wakandan schoolchild knew of Rudyarda's ruthlessness. At a young age, T'Challa himself had learned the shocking tale. How the Rudyardans had somehow slipped past the defenses. Warrior after warrior had slipped into the country, fighting like madmen with no worry for their lives, or the lives of children. It had happened during his father's rule, and it was almost fitting that T'Chaka should return at the start of a new, different kind of crisis with Rudyarda. Almost as if the crisis itself had summoned him. Now it was T'Chaka who listened in studious silence, as T'Challa told the disastrous tale of the damage done to Rudyarda and the dead shooter in New York City. By the time the story was finished, their elevator had brought them back to T'Challa's private entrance to the vibranium mine. The two emerged into softer, natural sunshine. The jungle at this end was snaked by antelope trails through the juniper trees, all in view of the breathtaking rock art that lined the mountainside. From this direction, he might be able to see the Rudyardan border, if not for the light fog misting the mountain. He felt a sting as he remembered Marimba's glowing face as she spoke of healing their nations. How could old wounds be healed when new ones were mounting? "As you can see," T'Challa said, "I have made quite the mess of diplomacy." "So it seems in today's light," T'Chaka said. "But clearly, you are not the only one to blame. And I would tell you a story, T'Challa. Perhaps you have heard one version, but hear me to the end. We have an unhappy history with Rudyarda, and I lay much of that history upon my own feet, just as you do today." "Your feet?" T'Challa said. He had a distant memory of schoolmates telling him to stick close to the roads or the Rudyardans might snatch him. "They tried to overwhelm us." "Oh yes, the old story. The invaders came and tried to take our land, but we beat them back and kept Wakanda's borders safe." "Now do you want to hear the truth?" T'Challa felt a flash of anger. How could a king not know the truth about his own country? "Always, Baba," T'Challa said, a bit sharply. "They were never invaders," T'Chaka said, his voice grave. "They brought no weapons. Many of them had no proper clothes or shoes. And they came so quickly, like the tide of a mighty ocean. They were not trying to invade us. They were trying to flee." "Flee?" Anger twisted to shock and disillusionment. "What do you mean?" "You know Rudyarda's history," T'Chaka said. "How it has mistreated its people." Rudyarda's borders had been drawn by Boers fleeing South Africa, and many of South Africa's racist habits had dogged the new nation until the people's uprisings. The government cracked down harshly on protesters who wanted liberation from tyranny. I did not know all of the stories then because its propaganda hid the truth from the world. But entire villages were razed. In the southern provinces, they saw no hope except Wakanda, T'Challa said, breathing his nation's name in a whisper. Despite being hidden, despite the secret travel passages, somehow they knew how to come to our doorstep. They begged us to let them in, but we did not. And far too many died. How was he only now hearing this? Rudyarda was not the only nation deft with its propaganda. "But our schools," T'Chaka sighed. "For me, the most difficult part of rule is appeasement," he said. "I was a new king and unsure. Knowing that I was responsible for so many dead kept me awake at night, and I argued before the council that we should formulate a policy, a procedure to help our neighbors in need. But the council had grown only more hardened. You see, the elder members said, they would have overrun us, and who will be next? So I bowed to the council's wishes. The misinformation was a natural outgrowth. I did not create the lies, but I did not stop them. This made T'Challa's recent horrors with the Avengers and Rudyarda feel all the worse. Rudyarda was struggling to rebuild after so much strife, and Wakanda still was not a true ally. His father's treasured words rang in his memory. Duty, knowledge, honor, loyalty, justice. These are the claws of the Panther clan. But despite his disappointment, T'Challa could not forget who it was he spoke to. You were just a young man respecting the word of those who had lived longer and seen more, he said. The words stung his throat, but he felt empathy, too. He knew the challenges of being king. But my rule became the bulwark of the isolationist cause. Even when I could hear children's screams in my sleep, sometimes I still hear them. I will never forget it. Dead or alive. The phrase chilled him. Dead or alive. T'Challa knew they could no longer ignore what must be confronted. We buried you, he said. It was the largest funeral in living memory. I saw you die. Grief tried to rise with the memory. But how could he grieve when his father stood beside him? How are you here? I do not know, T'Chaka said. And that frightens me. Me as well, T'Challa confessed. Okoye is beside herself, as if you are a sworn foe. And is he not a foe? A man's voice roared all around them, echoing against the mountain. M'Baku. They had been so careful to hide T'Chaka's return, but the secret was out. Was there a spy on the council who had reported it to M'Baku right away? Was council business so readily shared outside the halls? T'Challa's panther habit hummed into place, shielding him. By instinct, he stood before his father to protect him. His habit sensor revealed 12 hostile figures glowing only 20 yards from them, still hidden in the trees. How had they gotten so close? And he had left Okoye behind. He did not know what would happen if T'Chaka sustained mortal injuries now, but he had no desire to learn. If only he hadn't been so preoccupied. I heard them coming, T'Chaka whispered through his beads. But there was nothing to be done. We shall have an adventure today, it seems. If only you had a panther habit, T'Challa whispered back. T'Chaka clucked. I don't need it, youngster. I have enough strength from the herb. Show yourselves! T'Challa roared to the trees as if he were backed by an army. Brush rustled as M'Baku and his men and women warriors waded out into the open, all 12 armed and primed for battle with axes and deadly singizis. This was a war party, not a diplomatic mission. Warriors of the Jabari tribe, T'Challa called out, disrespecting M'Baku by looking away from him. As your king, I, T'Challa, proclaim that you return to your lands. Do not let M'Baku lead you to ruin. You risk banishment, and worse. For any who lays a hand upon us, turn away now, and I will remember this as a greeting party. None of the resolve melted from the faces of the Jabari. T'Challa, M'Baku said gently, even as his body was flexed for battle. It brings us no pleasure to be here, and none of us wishes to lay a hand upon you, our king. To T'Challa's surprise, M'Baku's men snapped their arms crossed in a Wakanda salute in unison, a display of sober respect. Even the Dora Milaje could not have done better. Then what is this, M'Baku? T'Challa said. He was broadcasting his voice to Okoye, as she chirped in his ear right away. We are 3 minutes away, my king. Get him talking. M'Baku likes to hear his own voice. M'Baku pointed toward T'Chaka, who stood behind T'Challa's shoulder. He does not belong among us. It is still customary to refer to a past king by his honorific M'Baku. M'Baku spat. That king is buried. As you said, the funeral was a spectacle. This aberration that walks beside you is not worthy of my respect. If you are unable to dispatch him because your heart cannot bear it, that duty falls to the Jabari. Of course, M'Baku was heavily superstitious. and many Jabari believed in demonic possession. The Jabari revered the moment of death as sacred, especially for a warrior. If Okoye were here, she might have felt her loyalties tested by M'Baku's stance, although for strategic rather than mystical reasons.
"You have chosen a doomed course,"
T'Challa said.
"Surely you do not believe this will end with my father in your custody."
"No one said anything about custody," M'Baku said. The fire returned to M'Baku's eyes when he spoke next.
"And you will be free to bury him again."
Literary Joe's Inner Child Podcast.